He stood motionless at the edge of the train platform, his suit soaked from the rain, the wedding ring still clutched tightly in his hand. The chapel behind him had emptied hours ago. She never walked down the aisle. In the distance, the city, lights flickered like ghosts, and beside him sat her suitcase, still zipped, still waiting. But she was gone. No note, no calls, just silence, and a single pressed flower tucked into the lining of his coat. The same flower she wore the day they made their deal, the same day she whispered, "Don't fall for me." Now he understood why she said it. A marriage of convenience, that's what they agreed. He needed a wife to save his family name. She needed an escape. No feelings, no attachments, just signatures. But somewhere between the stolen glances and late-night laughter, something very real had taken root. And now she was gone. Subscribe now, because tomorrow's story will haunt you even deeper. You'll need it. But before that, let me take you to the day it all began. The day it all began, no one looked her in the eye. The town of Elmbrook was made of cracked windows and quieter regrets. Dust curled off the gravel roads like whispers no one dared say aloud. Everything moved slowly here. The sun, the gossip, the life that never quite reached full bloom. And then there was her, Mara Hale. She walked with a limp that echoed on wood porches and across rusted fences. No one ever asked how it happened. They just watched her pass, eyes darting to the scar that ran like a river down her left cheek, or to the faded hem of her worn-out dress. She worked at the old tailor's shop on Main Street, patching clothes. For people who pretended not to know her name, some whispered she was a widow. Others said it wasn't her husband that died, but her. No one ever got close enough to ask. Her world was small. A room above the shop, a cat that never came when called, and silence. Not the peaceful kind, the aching, hollow kind. The kind that sits in your chest like an old nail you can't pull out. At church, people left space in the pews when she walked in. At the market, they handed her change like she might drop it. No friends, no laughter. Just the sound of the bell on the tailor's door swinging open and closed. The town had its reasons, or so they said. She had once been engaged. To a man with money, land, and a future. But something happened. Something no one talked about. One day there was a ring on her finger. The next, there was blood on her blouse and a scar on her cheek. Left. The town stayed. But only to remind her every single day that they remembered. She wasn't deaf. She heard the whispers. She should have known better. That girl always brought trouble. Poor thing. Shame doesn't fade like a bruise, but she didn't cry. Not anymore. Instead, she worked. Quiet, steady, invisible. Until the day he came. A stranger in a clean gray coat. A man who walked like he had something to forget too. And when he looked at her, really looked, he didn't flinch. Didn't glance away. He said, "Is this where the seamstress works?" She nodded. That was the beginning. Not of love, but of something far more dangerous. Hope, because people like her didn't get stories that ended well. They got rumors. They got locked doors. They got silence. But that man, with his crisp voice and unreadable eyes, sat in the corner while she stitched the hem of his coat. He asked no questions. He only watched her hands, the way they moved, the way they never trembled. She didn't know his name. He didn't offer. But he came back the next day. And the one after that. He never asked about the scar. He never mentioned the limp. And one day he left an envelope on the counter, containing a ring and a proposition. "Marry me." Not out of love, he said. He didn't believe in that anymore. He needed a wife for 1 year, for business, for family expectations. In return, she'd be cared for, protected. No questions, no obligations. It was absurd. Almost laughable, but no one had ever offered her anything that wasn't dipped in pity or poison. She didn't say yes. Not right away. She didn't say no either. That night, The wind howled outside her window like it was remembering things she had tried to forget. And she lay awake, staring at the ring in her hand, asking the quiet, what if this is the only door that ever opens? She wasn't sure what hurt more, the idea of staying in Elmbrook forever, or leaving as someone else's wife. But by morning, her mind was made. She walked back into the tailor shop with her jaw set like stone, and she whispered 2 words she hadn't said in years. I'll go. No one in town knew. No one cared. But something had begun to shift, like frost cracking under the first breath of spring. If this is breaking your heart already, you haven't seen the worst yet. Tap subscribe, I've got another truth waiting for you tomorrow. Because this wasn't a fairy tale. It wasn't even a second chance. It was a storm waiting to break. And Mara Hale had just stepped into it, ring first. Before we dive into the story, just a quick note. I'm Thomas, the voice behind this narration. If you enjoy how it sounds, let me know in the comments so we can keep the same voice in future videos. The first time he stepped into the shop, the bell above the door didn't jingle. It clanged like the start of something that couldn't be undone. Mara looked up from her sewing, needle mid-air. The man standing in the doorway didn't belong here. His coat was pressed, his boots had no dust, and his eyes weren't searching for thread or fabric. They were studying her. He nodded once. I was told this is where I could have a button mended. His voice was low, calm, carried no mockery, no syrupy charm. Just quiet intention. Mara nodded and held out her hand. He slipped off his coat, careful, like it mattered. Like it was a part of him. She turned it over, found the missing button, and gestured toward the chair in the corner. He sat, wordless. She stitched. He watched. Not her face, but her hands. They moved like they had always known pain and still chose softness. The room was quiet except for the tick of the old wall clock and the snap of her thread. When she was done, she handed it back. He took it gently and lingered a second too long before speaking. What's your name? She paused, unsure, then said, Mara. He smiled with only half his mouth. Mara, I'll remember that. He left without another word, but he came back the next day, and the one after that. He didn't need more mending. Sometimes he brought small tasks, a cuff undone, a fray on a sleeve. Sometimes he came with nothing but a book in hand, sitting by the window while she worked. They didn't always talk, and that was what made it strange. Mara had learned the rules of silence. She had worn them like armor. But with him, silence didn't feel like shame. It felt like breathing, like permission. He would speak only when necessary. You missed a stitch. She'd glance up. I didn't. And sure enough, he'd smile faintly because she hadn't. One afternoon, she caught him watching her reflection in the glass. Not in a way that made her shrink, but in a way that made her feel seen. Not the scar, not the limp, just her. She didn't know what to do with that. Word spread fast in Elmbrook. Mrs. Talbot from the bakery leaned in a little too close one morning and whispered, That man you've been seeing? What's he really after? Mara said nothing. Sheriff Dewey stopped by, pretending to check on her store permit. He lingered at the window a little too long. Strangers don't stay in Elmbrook without a reason, he said, like it was a warning. Even Mr. Crowley, the tailor whose shop she ran, suddenly began finding fault in her work. You've been distracted lately, he muttered. We don't have room for mistakes. The town didn't like change. And Mara? She was changed now, because someone was treating her like she mattered. She didn't dare believe it. Late one evening, just as the last sliver of sun disappeared behind the hills, he returned, coatless this time. She was sweeping the porch. He said, There's a place just outside town. Old vineyard. Quiet. Come with me? Mara hesitated. He had never asked her to leave the shop, never invited her anywhere. But something in his voice wasn't coaxing. It was hoping. So she followed. They didn't speak on the way. The road, stretched out like a secret, and the sky turned to velvet above them. At the vineyard, the grass had grown wild. The vines were bare, and yet there was something peaceful about it, a place the world had forgotten. He said, "I used to come here when I was younger, before everything changed." Mara looked at him. Before what? He didn't answer, but his jaw tensed like he was holding back something bitter. She didn't press. Instead, she asked the question that had been growing like a weed in her chest. "Why do you keep coming back?" He met her eyes then, really met them, not with charm, not with pity, and he said, "Because you look at me like I'm not broken." That moment didn't end. It hung in the air between them, alive. She whispered, "You never asked about my scar," he replied. "You never needed me to." The wind shifted, cold and strange. Somewhere in the distance, a branch cracked. They both turned, suddenly aware of how far they were from town, and how alone. What if someone saw you for who you are, not what you carry? Subscribe. One day that story might be yours too. On the walk back, Mara kept glancing over her shoulder. Not because she didn't trust him, but because Elmbrook had a way of watching you when you least expected it. Sure enough, the next morning, someone had thrown a rock through the front window of the tailor shop. No note, no message, but the glass said enough. Mr. Crowley fired her that same day, said it was for her safety, said she had brought this on herself. She left with a box of pins, a bundle of thread, and nowhere to go. She didn't cry. She went home, sat on the floor, and stared at the wall until her name didn't sound like hers anymore. Then came the knock. Soft, measured. She opened the door, and there he was. He didn't ask what happened. He already knew. Instead, he held out a small velvet box. Inside, it wasn't jewelry. It was a folded letter. A contract, 1 year. A marriage. No love required. She stared at him, silent. He said, "You deserve more than this town. Come with me. Let me give you a way out." Mara's fingers trembled as she held the paper, and somewhere, buried deep beneath the years of silence and sorrow, something began to flicker. Not trust. Not yet. But maybe the beginning of it. Snow fell harder that morning. Thick, wet flakes that clung to her eyelashes and silenced the town under a cold hush. Mara stood outside the courthouse, clutching the envelope he'd given her days ago. The contract. The so-called arrangement. 1 year of marriage, shelter, safety, a way out. But her hands shook. Because inside that courthouse, she wasn't just a name on paper anymore. She was a rumor. She was the rumor. Mrs. Talbot had seen them at the vineyard. Sheriff Dewey had watched her close her shop for the last time. And someone, she still didn't know who, had told the town that Mara was planning a bargain wedding to a man no one could trust. The town didn't ask questions. It whispered answers. As Mara walked through the hall that morning, a piece of paper fluttered at her feet. She bent to pick it up. It was a crude drawing. Her face, exaggerated, scarred, dressed in a bridal veil with the words, "Sold for shelter." Laughter echoed from the stairwell. She didn't cry. Not yet. She folded the paper neatly, tucked it into her coat, and walked straight into the courtroom. But something was wrong. The clerk frowned at her papers. "This isn't valid," he said flatly. "Your witness didn't show." She blinked. "What?" "Mr. Ashcroft, the man who vouched for your identity. He didn't come." Her breath froze in her lungs. Ashcroft, the same man who'd agreed to sign the affidavit in exchange for the last of her savings. He was a shopkeeper, a friend of her father's, a man she'd trusted. She left the courthouse in a daze, and there he was, Ashcroft, across the street, walking into the saloon. Laughing, she should have known. Everyone had a price in Elmbrook. Hers had been just low enough. Mara didn't go home. She walked until the road turned to ice, until the wind scraped her face and her knees ached from the cold. She walked past the abandoned vineyard, past the last fence, into the wild stretch of woods where the world disappeared behind white and gray. And then, she collapsed. Right there in the snow, her dress wet and torn, the envelope still clutched in her hands. The scar on her cheek throbbed from the wind. She buried her face in her arms, and for the first time in years, let it out. The grief, the shame, the raw, unfiltered ache of never being enough, of being seen only when it served someone else's story. She didn't want to be strong anymore. When she woke, it wasn't to shouting or a search party, it was to warmth. Slow and gentle. A fire crackled nearby. A coat, his coat, was draped over her shoulders, and he was sitting across from her tending to a small fire beneath a lean-to made from his jacket and pine branches. She blinked, confused. "You found me." He didn't look up. "I followed your footsteps," he said. They were getting shallow. She stared at him. "I'm not your burden," she rasped. "You don't have to fix me." He finally turned. "I know." Silence stretched between them. Then, quietly, she asked, "Why are you here?" He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the drawing. That drawing, the one they left for her outside the courthouse. Crumpled, wet, but still legible. "I saw this on the door of the chapel," he said. "They thought this would shame you." He looked up, eyes steady. "But it made me furious." She looked away. He moved closer, not touching her, just closer. "You don't have to marry me," he said. "Not out of desperation, not out of fear." Mara's voice cracked. "Then why did you offer it?" He hesitated. Then he answered with the one truth he'd buried deeper than any other. "Because I lost someone once, and I swore if I ever saw someone standing on the edge the way she had, I'd never walk away again." Mara's breath caught. "You don't owe me your heart," he said, "but I will stay, as long as it takes for you to believe it's still beating." That did it. The wall she'd built, brick by silent brick, cracked, not because he saved her, but because he stood with her in the cold, in the quiet, in the truth. They stayed there until morning. When they returned to town together, the whispers were louder than ever. Doors closed, heads turned. But for once, Mara didn't shrink. She walked beside him, chin high, coat tight, as though the ashes of what they'd burned behind them still glowed beneath her feet. They thought she was broken, but someone saw gold in the ashes. Subscribe. I promise you, tomorrow's story will prove love still lives out here. The town didn't stop whispering, but Mara stopped listening. It was a strange freedom, walking through Elmbrook with someone who chose her anyway. With someone who didn't ask her to smile or shrink. With someone who carried silence like a gift, not a weapon. The first morning back, she woke up in the tiny cabin outside town, his cabin, to the sound of an axe splitting wood and the smell of coffee so strong it almost brought tears. He handed her a chipped mug and simply said, "This place needs work." It wasn't romantic. It was real. The roof leaked, the windows were cracked, and the fireplace coughed more than it burned, but it was theirs now, not just his. Together they stripped old wallpaper, patched floorboards, hauled stone from the riverbank for a chimney. He swore he could fix himself. At night they fell asleep on opposite sides of the hearth with 2 blankets and 1 secret. Neither of them wanted space anymore. Sheriff Dewey didn't like it. He showed up 3 times that week. "You know who he really is, don't you?" he asked Mara on the 3rd visit, boots tracking dirt onto the porch. Mara didn't flinch. "I know who he is now," Dewey scoffed. "Men like that, they leave scars." She looked him square in eye. The eyes. So do cowards. He didn't come back after that. Spring came early that year. Mara planted seeds along the edge of the cabin. Onions, carrots, stubborn herbs that refused to grow in town. He carved a table from reclaimed wood and built a swing for the maple tree out back. It was a life stitched together with sweat and splinters. One evening she stood barefoot in the kitchen, apron dusted with flour, and whispered, "This doesn't feel borrowed anymore." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into the cupboard and pulled out something wrapped in linen. Her hands shook as she opened it. A ring. Simple. Strong. Forged, not bought. He said, "This isn't part of any arrangement." Then, softer, "It's yours, if you want it." She didn't speak. She stepped forward and kissed him, not gently, but with everything she'd been holding back. They made plans. Small ones at first: expand the shed, fix the roof beams, maybe buy a horse if the money stretched far enough. He taught her to ride. She taught him to laugh, and when the first daffodils broke through the frost, she whispered to him under the stars, "Maybe I was never broken, just buried. But peace never comes without a price." It was early April when it all unraveled. A letter arrived, sealed in red wax, no return name. Just a mark, a crest etched in silver. He froze when he saw it. Mara watched his hands clench, jaw tight. He didn't open it right away. That night he stood by the fire, the unopened letter in his hand. She sat across from him, knowing, feeling, that whatever was in there would change everything. Finally he spoke. "My name's not David Hale," he said. "I took that name when I left the East." Mara's breath caught. "I was born Silas Duval. My family owns land back there. Old money, a scandal too big to bury." He looked at her. "I didn't just walk away. I was disowned." He handed her the letter. She opened it slowly. Inside, a formal request. His father had passed. Silas was named heir. They wanted him back, wanted him married. Properly. No scandal. No dust-born limping bride, as the line read. She dropped the letter. The silence after was loud. He crossed the room in 2 steps. "I didn't ask for that world back. But it's yours," she said, "and I'm not part of it." He shook his head. "You're the only part that matters." But she didn't answer, because some ghosts don't knock before they come inside. They tear through doors, and hers whispered, "You were always going to be left behind." That night, she packed a small bag. She left the ring on the mantel. She didn't leave a note, just walked into the woods, the stars watching like witnesses. But halfway to the river road, a voice cut through the trees. "You really think I'd let you vanish without a fight?" She turned. There he was. Coat unbuttoned, hair wind-tossed, barefoot. She scowled. "You don't get to chase me." "I'm not chasing, I'm following. There's a difference." She stood still, angry tears threatening. "Your life is waiting out there." "No," he said, stepping closer. "Our life is right here." "But I'm not," her voice cracked. "I'm not what they want. I'm not what you should want." He looked at her, eyes burning. "I don't want a wife who fits. I want a wife who fought, who stayed, who looked back at the fire and built a house out of the ashes." Mara's knees buckled, but he caught her. Not like a hero, like a partner. They walked back home. Together. And this time the fire inside didn't need fixing, it was roaring. "You've come this far with her, you felt that, didn't you? Subscribe. I want you to meet someone else tomorrow, someone just as forgotten." They didn't wait for summer. Mara stood just outside the chapel that had once refused her entrance, the place where holy words were reserved for the clean, the unbroken, the blessed, and she waited. The wind tugged at her braid, the scar along. Her cheek caught the light. She didn't hide it. Inside, the church filled with whispers. Some came out of curiosity. Others came to witness the fall, because everyone in Elmbrook knew. The prodigal son had returned, and he wasn't marrying who they'd picked. David, Silas, had sent the letter back, not with apology, but with finality. He didn't want inheritance. He wanted home. And home wasn't measured in land or lineage. It was the woman who once limped across town under stairs, but now stood like storm-weathered stone. The doors creaked open. He walked in, alone. No priest. No music. Just boots on old wood and a voice that didn't waver. "I was born a Duval. Raised with a name, a title, and a future I didn't choose." His gaze swept the room. All the judgment, all the memories, all the fear. But I came back to Elmbrook for a woman you all tried to forget. Murmurs rose, a cough, a shifting of coats. He raised his voice. Her name is Mara. She's not a mistake. She's not a secret. She's the reason I became worthy of any kind of life at all. A pause. Then, and if she'll still have me, I'm not waiting another day. He turned. She was already walking down the aisle. Not in white, in river blue, the color of the sky after a storm. No veil. No bouquet. Just her. Every scar. Every story. Every choice. Outside under a sky just beginning to snow, they stood together. No one officiated, but everyone saw. He took her hands. I never needed a witness to love you, he said, but I want one now. She smiled, then let them watch. And with breath frosting in the air, he kissed her. Not with desperation, not with apology, but with peace. Later, after the crowd thinned and the stars claimed the sky, Mara sat on the porch of the little cabin that had once been just his. She watched the firelight through the window, her fingers tracing the wood of the railing. He joined her quietly, a blanket in his arms, 2 cups of tea in hand. You cold? He asked. She nodded. He draped the blanket over their shoulders. They sat in silence. Then she whispered, You didn't save me. He looked at her. She smiled. You just gave me a place to land. Weeks passed. Then spring came again. They planted more than carrots. She picked out names, not because she was expecting, not yet, but because hope was no longer a luxury. One name stayed in her pocket, a girl's name. Her mother's one day, maybe. And on the first day of summer, they carved a word into the wood beam above their door, kept because that's what she was, no longer cast aside, no longer pitied, but chosen, held, kept. She was never a curse. She was someone's miracle all along. Subscribe and let me introduce you to the next miracle tomorrow.